To generate IP reverse, usually it's you make games and toys from movies and television. This was going to be the other way around. We were going to take the games and toys and make them into videos, direct-to-videos in those days, and then television series and film. That was a very exciting way to kind of, change course, if you will. And so when I started there, and this was now a number of years ago, this was when the Barbie direct-to-video business was hot. Long before we had the big sensation last year with the Barbie movie, and it was a wonderful thing to see that kind of, and it took a long time, obviously, from the time I was there to the time to see that happen, and it was really terrific.
What lessons from tennis can you apply to your day-to-day life? How do you build a career as a deal maker working with high-profile talent? And how has the entertainment industry and what it needs from its lawyers changed over the years? Today, I am joined on the Abstract by Peter Steckelman. Peter is the SVP of Business and Legal Affairs at Tennis Channel. Like me, he's an avid tennis player. He was also previously the VP of Legal Affairs at Konami. You may know that from popular titles like Dance Dance Revolution. I definitely played that at a birthday party or two when I was a kid, or Yu-Gi-Oh! He spent time as the VP of Business and Legal Affairs at Warner Brothers, and earlier in his career, he was at Mattel and Fox Entertainment. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of The Abstract, recorded here in LA, Peter.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Tyler. I'm excited to be here, and listening to that description of my experience brings back some really fond memories and some more challenging ones as well.
Well, we're going to talk about the challenging ones today.
Excellent.
That's what a podcast is for. I'm super excited to have you because we're both big tennis fans, and you're the GC of Tennis Channel, which is super cool. Let's start by just talking about the U.S. Open, right? Like, we're recording a few weeks after the U.S. Open. It seems like a year where there's a changing of the guard to me. Did you watch a bunch of it?
I watched a lot of it, more than I probably will ever admit to. But the truth of the matter is that it was from first ball to last ball, which is an expression we use at Tennis Channel quite often, a very compelling tournament.
Yeah.
There was not a slow match, an uninteresting match, a matchup where you thought, well, this isn't going to be fun. Everything was, it just built on more exciting play after another, and culminating with the finals weekend was just wild.
Yeah.
It was just, wild in the sense of just spectacular play by the two champions, Sabalenka and Sinner, and really, really aggressive, competitive, right in there with Pegula and Alcaraz. And it was just, magic from the standpoint of a fan experience, from being part of the sport itself and in my day-to-day world, and just the energy and the kind of interest that people took from it. And this is not a knock on, the last old guard right now, I would say, is Djokovic.
Sure.
He's, this champion is just unbelievable, coming right off the gold medal.
Yeah.
After on the same grounds as Roland Garros, just really wonderful for the whole sport, and the excitement and the changing of the guard, maybe. But we go through this conversation probably every Grand Slam,
right?
When somebody not named Djokovic, not named Federer, not named Nadal wins. And so I'm going to reserve my personal judgment to just say I just love tuning in and watching and getting excited and inspired by the play.
It was a great tournament. I'm super excited. I love Alcaraz and Sinner. Their movement is amazing. It's really cool to see Coco continuing to play pretty well. Sabalenka seems to really be establishing herself as a perennial favorite, right? So that's great to see on the women's side. I also feel like tennis is kind of having a cultural moment. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I was in New York during the Open. Yeah, it seems like people want to be buying like tennis clothes, and more people are tuning into both the women's and the men's tour. Yeah.
I think that's a very fair assessment, and I look at it in terms of both the way the media partners have worked with the USTA and the USTA themselves for kind of ramping up their fan experiences and opening up the tournament basically a week earlier with qualifying and the kind of less competitive yet equally fun and innovative programs of having fan experiences and legend players come out and kind of not embarrass themselves, obviously, but would embarrass any amateur that would come on the court, that would dare to come on the court. But the fun part about it is having them lean into that experience and kind of taking those 3 weeks in New York and really saying, hey, this is our time. This is tennis in the U.S. We're going to have a great time with it, and we want New Yorkers and people from all over the world to feel connected to the sport. And I think that's what you're probably noticing, is people do feel connected to it, whether it's watching the fan experiences, seeing the non-tennis players in the stands, that some fun celebrities that people know. It's all very much part of the connective tissue that brings tennis, which is ostensibly an individual sport, but a community sport simultaneously together. And that's really where you see that pull together, certainly on this side of the Atlantic.
I went to Djokovic's first round match, but I also went to the practice session on Friday afternoon prior to the tournament starting. And that's free. So for folks who are in New York, based in New York, want to take their kids to some tennis, I don't know. I think that was really cool. It was cool. We saw Alcaraz practice. We saw Medvedev practice. It was really fun.
And I will say this about the practice matches, watching the pros at that level practice is not like you and I going to the courts. It's just not. The only thing that's the same, the vocabulary is the same, but the execution is entirely different. And what's so interesting is you watch them work in real time on a certain thing. Let's say one of them's having an issue with a forehand. They're going to work on forehands, a volley, whatever the single stroke is, or a strategy, a point construction, and watching them put that out there to the public in real time, knowing in a few hours they have to do it, on the main stadium for everyone, and their ranking points are on the line. Yeah. That's a real behind the scenes kind of moment that I think anybody who plays tennis can really appreciate the level of work that has to go into that. Because we all have to hit a bucket of balls when we're playing, and you're not always going to get 10 out of 10 in a row. These guys, it's more like 999 out of 1,000 in a row, and the one they miss is because a fan yelled something and they went, what? And they turned around or something, right? So it's just an interesting dynamic as a fan who's a player and a kind of a pretty good amateur to see that action and kind of take away from that up close and personal, what you really don't always get to do in a main stadium. And even wherever your seat is, they're in a different mode.
Yeah, you can get right there. I mean, you can be like 10 feet away from the court, but it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to buy the courtside seat.
And you can see the coaching team and their hitting partners, and sometimes it's two pros that hitting with each other, and that's often, a little pick-up doubles happens right away, and you're like, oh, look at this, is so great, and you don't want to move. You're just like completely transfixed by it.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite memory from the U.S. Open?
I do, and it's funny. It's practice court related because as a kid, I used to go. I grew up in the metropolitan New York area, and we would go to the U.S. Open like many families would. And one year, I was learning how to use a camera correctly, like a proper, not an instant camera, like a camera with an f-stop and aperture changes. And I'm going to get the vocabulary wrong. And one of the things I decided to do was take my camera to the practice courts and not pretend I was a real photographer, but pretend I was a real photographer. And I was taking some pictures, and of course I'm sure the camera was making the click 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 noises and everything, and I got a really, really tight shot of Chris Everett, and it was so tight that she gave me a very dirty look, which I only realized after I got the film to tell you how old the camera was developed, and I went, oh, she must have been mad that I was distracting her. But it was a great experience to be that close, and it was like you said, 10 feet away, and you just had access. And they smiled afterwards. There was some autograph signing, but it wasn't that accessible. It was more like, hey, you're watching them practice. And the other thing I watched, I think this was Martina back in the day. They had a number of hitting partners for her, and so Martina would be on one side of the court, and the hitting partners, there's like 6 or 7 people on the other side of the court, and I was trying to figure out, as a youngster, what's happening here? And she's just hitting, and she's not missing. The people she's hitting, they look like college players, like college male players. Yeah. And they're hitting with her, and the balls are coming pretty fast and pretty aggressively. And every 5 minutes or so, she'd stop. She looks reasonably cool, calm, collected, and the male players were sucking wind. They were like, they were couldn't breathe, soaking wet, and then she'd like change them out. And so I realized what was happening was they needed a block of male players to keep up with her in her prime as just practicing, just hitting.
That's
and
amazing.
It was watching this happen, and then she by the end of the workout she was of course as worn out as they were. But at the beginning, I thought, wow, she just kept going like it was like a factory in a way. And I always thought, wow, that's some serious skill, stamina, power, all of it. And it was one of those memories that kind of lives in my head of just being really impressed and inspired by the quality that you see up close like that.
Incredible. I mean, I could talk about the U.S. Open all day.
We could. Yes, we absolutely could.
We should talk a little bit about your career as an entertainment lawyer. And I want to go back to the start. I think you started your career at Disney, for in-house.
In-house at Disney. That came actually after a quick job at a bankrupt film library. Huh. And the bankrupt film library job I got through a friend of mine who I play tennis with, ironically, out here in L.A. And the job there was to assess the film assets of this particular library for valuation, for sale and or re-licensing if they could. And as I was doing this kind of fairly routine analysis, I realized even very early on in my career, these contracts are really interesting. No two look really alike, but there are some similarities. I would much rather be negotiating these than reading about them and putting them in a spreadsheet. And that was kind of that's how I pitched myself to Disney. Yeah. So I just finished this exercise with this film library, and I'm now ready to apply those skills to you and to help you build this side of the film business. And they hired me as a temp initially, and then they made me permanent afterwards. And it was a really interesting experience for a number of reasons, not the least of which was the kind of work I got to do, having the leverage of the Disney name and brand behind you when you're negotiating, and also understanding that there's a level of professionalism and kind of a consistency that a studio, certainly of that caliber, not only expects from its creative talent, but from its business and legal affairs talent, and its operational talent, accounting, everybody had to work to a very high level of professionalism, which I leaned into and really enjoyed. I like that a lot because it was both aspirational and challenging. Like I can do this. I can be this kind of professional, and I found that very confidence building.
I'm sure it was exciting to work for Disney.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, did you think to yourself, this is like the first step on a long career as an entertainment lawyer? Like, I really want to be working in Hollywood? Or did that sort of then emerge and happen more by happenstance?
Yes, and.
Yes,
so it's more like, yes, I did while I'm doing it, but the more different opportunities and the different types of deals I got to work on, the more I wanted to do more different types of deals to work on. So that what I mean by that is the first handful of deals you get started on, you master the concepts and you move through them, and then I kept thinking, well, what else can I do? I want more. I want to be challenged more. I want it's like tennis, right? You learn a flat forehand, and then you see a topspin. I want to learn how to do that. Yeah. So that was the kind of experience I applied as a professional, and so I got to work on a couple of cross-divisional marketing deals and things like that. But it really wasn't culturally the organization that encouraged that level of cross-pollination, if you will. And so that's fine. I mean, you learn anything in the world by trying, right? Sure. So I tried, and that did not work itself out the way I thought long term. So I used that as a kind of pivot to stay in the entertainment business, but thought, well, if I don't want to do this type of medium, what else is there? Well, there's television. And so that's what got me to Fox Television, was the ability to see that the film side that I had been working on was terrific, rewarding, and very, very educational. Now I want television. Right. And that made me a little bit of a unicorn even back then, because most people stay within a medium. They'll stay television lawyers, they'll stay film lawyers. They might, and this is around the time, video games were becoming more of a discipline versus a kind of a extra. And so I would say that side of it was very helpful to see just how, just how different and the same things are. And different meaning the medium is different, the timing is different, the structure is the same. It's intellectual property being exploited in a different way.
Right.
So that's to make it back down to core legal principles. But your timing, you have no time in a television deal because your shooting schedule is much faster. Film can be as long as it needs to be.
Right.
And there's a little more balance that way. And then the different related issues with the television side come with the type of television you're doing, whether it's game shows, scripted television, non-scripted television, documentaries. Then they're all in one place. Animation, live action, hybrid. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, you wanted more? Here you go. And so that was kind of like a little terrifying in hindsight now. But what it taught me there also was the ability to time manage and juggle and to be very on my game to, if I had, 8, 10, 12 deals in development, great. I had 8, 10, 12 deals in production, also great. And then what are the ancillary issues? What are my intellectual property issues I have to worry about? What are the talent issues? What are the employment issues? And all of a sudden, the concept of being an entertainment lawyer went from a couple of structural deals at Disney to all kinds of television deals at Fox to now the subject matter is expanding long beyond any kind of specific entertainment umbrella into I would not call them sub-disciplines. They're sub-disciplines within the entertainment space, but they're very much standalone. And people are employment lawyers. They are intellectual property lawyers, and people are M&A lawyers and investment lawyers. There's a million groups of that. And so what that kind of gave me at Fox was this much broader understanding of the business and how the pieces of the business fit together, some better than others, obviously, and some more curious, like, why would we be doing this if it doesn't reach that kind of, and you start to understand strategy and why something gets greenlit versus not greenlit. And that's really where you start to develop not only your legal skills, but your business strategy and your choices. Why is it important to save X percentage on a profit participation deal for random show X? Well, we don't want to, and the answer is you don't want to set a precedent of just being, oh, we'll just hand out money like candy. Here you go. Right. Just ask business affairs. They'll just hand it out like candy. That's not how any of that works, by the way. It's a much more, detailed negotiation strategy and planning based on what the organization is looking for on a long-term strategy basis. So that became, I would say, a much deeper kind of breadth of subject matters and experience. And from that standpoint, there was some time that part of Fox was being spun off to Disney, which would have made a little bit of a circle for me in a lot of ways. But at that point, I was looking for more. I was looking for another challenge, and I had been recommended to look at Mattel because they were building an entertainment group. Now, I had some consumer products experience through a little bit through Disney and a little bit through Fox, but this became much more. It's Mattel.
Sure.
I mean, it's Mattel, Hasbro, Jax.
Products.
It's products. And so to generate IP reverse, usually it's you make games and toys from movies and television. This was going to be the other way around. We were going to take the games and toys and make them into videos, direct to videos in those days, and then television series and film. That was a very exciting way to kind of, change course, if you will. And so when I started there, and this was now a number of years ago, this was when the Barbie direct-to-video business was hot. Long before we had the big sensation last year with the Barbie movie, and it was a wonderful thing to see that kind of, and it took a long time, obviously, from the time I was there to the time to see that happen, and it was really terrific. A very kind of impressive, satisfying, and by the way, all of the management creative has changed a number of times since my day there, but the core business didn't change, which was taking the intellectual property, figuring out ways to not only expand it within its normal categories, but find new categories and new ways to be part of that experience for the consumer and for building your market to newer consumers. Because people will, this is the research and statistics bear this out, not just young girls went to the Barbie movie.
Right.
So that's, to their credit, creatively, they went in a direction that, under maybe other administrations wouldn't have been that. When I say administrations, leadership administrations and management
yeah.
administrations at Mattel, wouldn't have been that possible. And
Yeah.
now you can see the result of taking risk.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, and again, going back to kind of learning where the strategy goes, risk is that same piece of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? What's the risk here? Well, the risk to a company like Mattel is taking an iconic brand that is doing very well for it corporately, revenue-wise, shareholder-wise, and doing something different with it. And
right.
The word different, you can put that lowercase d, capital D, and that can be a little daunting. And being part of a group figuring out how to do that within that culture at the beginning was very, very, very rewarding and very eye-opening to see. And there were different parts of the business that we don't want to do this level of creativity. And then there were others that we want to do a much bigger level of creativity and kind of figuring how that works, and then going around and closing deals around different production companies and different, voice talent and things like that. That's all part of the execution side. It's really quite interesting and quite special as far as being an entertainment practitioner, because what you don't normally see is that from the consumer product side. That's what I'm describing as a much more classic development production model that you see in a studio network, small production company. You don't often see that at the Mattel, Hasbro, Jax level kind of thing. So I found it really, really exciting and challenging in a lot of ways.
The Abstract is brought to you by SpotDraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, SpotDraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows, to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, SpotDraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. SpotDraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at SpotDraft.com. Across each of those different types of business, you have movies, you have television, you have packaged goods or consumer products that are related to movies or TV shows that folks love. You're working with really creative people. Yep. These are all people who are in the jobs that they're in for the most part because of their creativity. I guess, is there anything that you learned over that timeline about how to work well with creative types or with people who are employed, right, because they've got the next great idea or they've got the vision for how to take this short story and turn it into a feature-length film, right? Yeah. So from the classic entertainment model that you're describing, I think the takeaway, and this is a hindsight takeaway, because when you're in the middle of it, it's more like, I don't understand anything you're doing, right? So honest, that's by the way, I'm not this is not unique to a business affairs group. Yeah. This is unique to colleagues in the same creative group, right? And so what I learned in hindsight is be a really good listener. Yeah. And be a really open-ended kind of almost, I wouldn't say therapist, to kind of let them steer you, but kind of really elicit, what are they trying to do here? What is that creative vision? And try to get them to boil it down. Sometimes that works, and a lot of times it doesn't. It's just you almost need to see it in some other medium versus a verbal description. You want to see a piece of art. You want to see a couple of script pages, something. And that helps. But I think the most important thing, because of the way the studio business structure works, is to remind the creative folks that you're on their side. Right. That's the key, because sometimes they feel, and sometimes business affairs feels the same, that people are at cross purposes, they're off strategy, they're off risk, this is too risky, this is not risky enough. All of those things come into the conversation. But as a business affairs professional, and as I've grown in tenure and in responsibility, it's important to set the example of being a good listener. And to say things like, I absolutely see that this is the direction you're moving in. Here's where I think we can do this. And here's where I think we're going to have to do some, not a linear
A to B. We're going to have
Sure.
we're going to have a couple of steps along the way, and to be really open to a dialogue. So listening and a dialogue really makes the difference, and that gets rewarded like anything else with just be respectful. And you may think it's the wackiest idea in the world, and you may think there is no way that the people who have the green light money are going to say this is going to work.
Yeah.
But who cares? Try it. I mean, it doesn't matter at one point in the process, because you want to encourage the creativity. You want to encourage the risk taking, or at least the risk conception. Not necessarily the risk taking. It can be is a more of a nuanced answer, but
sure.
But the risk thought and doing something that's not ordinary. Being extraordinary. That's what the business is built on. I mean, there's a number of studios, a number of networks, a number of people making creative choices every single day, and we as consumers are better for it. That's what I would say there. So I think it's a matter of respect and listening, and not feeling. And this, I've known some folks that feel this. Boy, I wish I could be that creative.
Yeah.
And they get a little cranky, a little depressed about it. And I think, well, just then. If that's your position, then lean in and help them and grow and support it and make it flourish. And if the response is, oh, I don't feel like it, or something like that, you're like, well, then you got to be positive, right?
Yeah.
You've got to take the level of respect and positivity with the listening and the steering through the proper suggestion model.
I mean, I think that's an interesting point. Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, yes, there are creative types, quote unquote, who are the animators, right? Or are the cinematographers, or are the folks who are writing the scripts, right? But I actually think creativity plays a big role in a lot of people's day-to-day lives, or a lot of people's work, not just people who have jobs like that. If you're negotiating a contract and you come up with a particularly interesting way to access someone's IP, or to hedge risk related to, maybe like the three-way interplay between three parties who are all exchanging IP over the course of a number of years. I don't know. I'm not an IP lawyer, but I'm curious, like, what do you think about the role of creativity in your day-to-day? That
is a really great question, and the answer is you have to take a level of creativity into your day-to-day negotiating and drafting. It's important for a number of reasons. Number one is you don't want to be just cookie cutter form filling out lawyering. That works on a very limited basis to things like a location release, or something like, I agree to be filmed on camera in this live audience right now. Okay. Not a lot of thought, not a lot of it is what it is kind of thing, right? But when you're going through, like you described, a shared intellectual property situation or a licensing arrangement, you want to come up with the things that you need as a business, the things the other side needs as a business, and you hope that Venn diagram is a circle. Now, it's rarely going to be, if it's a circle, it's not going to be the circle you think it is, right? It's going to be one of those elliptical oval designs that your geometry teacher will give you the right grade for getting correctly, and they'll get the wrong grade for not. And the truth of the matter is, within that space, that's where your creativity can shine, right? Because party A wants something, and party you, let's say you're party B, it's not going to work. There's some either an institutional reason, there's another business or legal reason you can't do something. So what do? They're insisting, you're insisting. We've got to come with some level of compromise, and that's the art of the compromise, and the art of negotiation comes in. And you see what they want, and you say to yourself, okay, we can't get there the conventional way, so now let's get there the winding road way. And you try to figure out what that winding road is, and oftentimes you can come up with some level of shared participation in that particular deal point, which usually does a lot to alleviate, I want to do X, I can't do X. Well, if we're both kind of working simultaneously together in a mutually beneficial way, you probably can get the X thing done. And that's what I've learned, is that then the Venn diagram does become the circle, but you have to do I would call the classic business commercial discussion around that. And then you got to document it in the legal side very, very much to match the business term. And I've seen some of that. I've been in some negotiations where the wording goes back and forth. Well, this is just like we talked about in our meeting. That's correct. Isn't that, are we changing? No, no. But you captured it the way we wanted it to be captured. And you think, good. Right. And then sometimes it's the other way around. This is nothing what we discussed in our meeting. You think, are you sure? And then so it becomes that moment of creativity of trying to then persuading people, no, this actually is what we talked about, and this is what we want to do. And remember, we're doing this solution because goal X has an obstacle of obstacle A. With this solution, you get goal X sort of with obstacle A basically eliminated. And that's where you end up in the kind of compromise and the notion of the creativity, because it's not as simple as, here is a license of a trademark. Great. Now what? Right. It's the answer to now what is really is the long form contract.
You're trying to solve business problems.
Correct.
Right. And you have experience doing this yourself, because when you were at Konami, you spent time as like a studio exec there too, right? Or you were working on the business side, not just working as the company's lawyer for a period of time.
That's right. On all of the jobs I've had a business and legal affairs role. So I've been the kind of person that will both argue with myself about how much money makes sense, and then I'll argue with, why are you moving the language, just qualifying my license from the front of the paragraph to the back of the paragraph? What am I missing?
Yeah.
And so I've kind of had both of those opportunities. What I would say there is, especially on the video game side, you run into some standard issues where let's say Konami wants a new game and they go to a developer and we're licensing software in now, right?
Right.
So it's not my software. I get a limited use of it, but once it's in the game, the person who has the software can't tell me the software has to come out, right?
Right.
So you have to negotiate around that, and then what you also have to make sure of is that what you're getting is exclusive to you. And if some element that they have is exclusive to them, we need a very, very broad grant in so that I can make games and derivative versions of the games going forward, right? So that's where, and if sometimes there's the commercial component that you're talking about, the business side comes in, well, game 1 through 3, we'll take this kind of royalty. You start doing games 4, whatever, we might have to talk about escalating the royalty or reducing it if you're using less. I mean, that's always been my response is, oh, you want more? Well, what if I pare it back and it's mostly my additions to the game? And sometimes that quiets the request down, and sometimes it just makes for a longer negotiation. It's fine. And so the reality is, what you want to do in those circumstances is assess everyone's need, everyone's commercial expectation, and the culture of the investment that you're making on whichever side you're on of that transaction.
I want to ask you about talent agreements.
Sure.
And I actually think that that's something that these days a lot more GCs who are listening might have to deal with. I mean, if you think about influencer marketing and other sorts of brand deals, right? You've negotiated a lot of talent agreements, including now at Tennis Channel. What's it like to work with these sort of like slightly famous people or work through their agents? How do you manage those relationships in the right way to get an agreement done?
Okay, the trite answer is very carefully.
Yeah. With caution.
With caution, right? The reality of it is, because they are, certainly I'll use the Tennis Channel example, they're very high profile. People know who they are. Part of it for me is taking the experience I've had as a leader across different divisions in different parts of the media world in film and television, and applying that level of respect and understanding to these negotiations, which means that if we're in the middle of a deal and the money is X and my head of production and I are figuring out the right number for a certain person, and we go back and forth until we get the number where everybody's happy, we want people to feel good. And that's the one thing I've learned as a talent lawyer. And this goes back to my Warner Brothers days as well, which I went, somewhat in Fox and Mattel also, but Warner's, this was a cultural imperative, if you will. They're very talent friendly. And it was across all divisions that dealt with talent. So your job as a business and legal affairs lawyer was to make sure that always lived in the back of your mind, that
Right.
being talent friendly. Okay. That also meant sometimes you might be in a position to have to give up some things you don't want to give up commercially, but for the larger good of the studio, because in a studio environment, if one division is doing something with talent X, they want to feel good to work with another division and another division. So you can understand the need for that synergistic kind of cultural relationship. So you do that and you respect that and you make your deals, and 9 times out of 10, you're fine. You just do it, and it's part of the, you may have to spend a little more money, do a little more in the perks area, but you get it done. Get to Tennis Channel, and we have certain of our talent have more trophies than others, right?
Sure.
So this is not a surprise to anybody. It's no different than a studio.
Yeah.
There are studio deals that were for Oscar winners and studio deals for non-Oscar winners.
Right.
And so what I tried to do at Tennis Channel was, at least when it came to the legal language, pretty much make it as uniform as possible. Meaning, we call you for tournament X and you're available, you come and it's part of your deal.
Yeah.
Great. We travel you a certain way. We provide you meals a certain way, hair and makeup, things like that. We'll ask you to do some publicity a certain way, and that's pretty much everybody on our air. The differences become what happens where there's a conflict. There's somebody works for another network, somebody has because our talent is American, the English-speaking world will use them at certain events. So we have people that will work for not only Tennis Channel, but for, let's say, an Australian network or a UK network.
Right.
And what do we do around that? How do we negotiate around that? And you just do. You basically, I mean, it sounds so simple when I say it that way.
Yeah.
You have to know what it is. I mean, you have to have the detail in front of you to say, okay, and I've watched some of our talent where they'll have our microphone at one for certain days, and they'll have, let's say, the BBC or was it? I want to say Tennis 7 in Australia. I'm gonna. If those of you, if I got the network wrong, I apologize. You'll see.
It would be exciting to know that we have some Australian listeners.
Exactly. You want to make sure that you respect what everyone's commercially agreeing to. Then the legal's easy, because then you just say days X is Tennis Channel, days Y is tournament, whoever network is whatever, and you just work through it. But the fundamental notion of respect and understanding carries through. And my challenge specifically at Tennis Channel, more so than in the film and television world, is I'm a fanboy, right? So I have a real problem sometimes. I walk into our green room and I'm like, okay, there's
Right.
I'm like, great.
Jim Courier,
for example, Dad Ward Tracy Osmond, they're all there, and they all know me, so they all know what I do, and so it's very much like a hi, and I'm always like, everybody happy, and I get a little nervous sometimes, and thankfully it's the least issue for us, and I think part of it is because of the sport we're all in, and because they live in the sport and in their respective, in their like stature, if you will. Me, I'm like happy to be there, right?
Yeah.
I'm just, and then we talk, collegially, very much, it's very tennis centric, shocking that we talk that way, and off I go, and off I go on my day, and they get on camera, and life goes on. But the reality for me is, we had this. I actually had this conversation with 2 of our talent recently about the process of doing their contracts, and one of them actually. I made a comment to one of them, and I said, your agent has been terrific working with both me and the junior person in my department. Yeah. And the talent says to me, you have to tell me if it's ever any other way, because I want to make sure. I said, oh, no, don't. It's never been, and this is somebody we've done a number of deals with. It's always been above board, totally professional. He's a terrific advocate for you, and understand, but he's a total pro about getting to the finish line. Right. And so that was kind of important. And then somebody else mentioned, oh, that's interesting, because when we do it, because this particular person does it directly. Yeah. Some of them deal directly with us, and some of them have agents and representatives. It's all different. But what I try to do is make sure that as a leader, my team and I are always taking the position, again, talent friendly, very respectful. We don't put any sneaky language in. We're very upfront about if there's a new business term that we've discussed, I highlight that when we're going out with the new paper. And I want to make sure that they feel good about signing and being part of our family, our Tennis Channel family.
I liked, you said it very early on, sort of as we were talking about this, you said you want the talent to be happy.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a whole host of other sort of agreements that companies might be negotiating or entering into where that, I mean, sometimes gets forgotten, right? Like, like in employment, like you're hiring a new employee. Yeah, there's a little bit of a negotiation there around comp and vacation and maybe, but you want your new employee to be happy, right? Or you have a new partnership with someone, like a marketing deal or a rev share, I mean, there's a discussion about commercials and, who's giving what and whose marketing team is going to spend more. But like ultimately, like you want the partner to be happy, right? I mean, it seems like an obvious point, but I think that sometimes as people focus very closely in on, we're negotiating this thing and we want to close this thing in the next week. Right. You forget sometimes that bigger picture.
No, that's exactly right. And I think it's important because when you have a volume of deals that certainly I handle now and across a number of different subject matters, it's always important to take a moment and step back and go, why am I doing this?
Right.
What's my why? Right. And that's a very classic question, but it's hard to ask and answer while you're, like you said, in the middle of doing a million things. Yeah. And so when you look at a certain deal and you're getting some resistance on something that you think is fairly basic, you have to step back and go, why? What is the resistance? And often for us, the resistance is they've not done these kind of deals with us before. Mm-hmm. And they're just learning how to work with us. And things that I cannot do because of my restrictions come with inbound tournament footage, for example. They just have to learn that. And it's not a negative. It's just a matter of both educating in a very collegial kind of helpful, collaborative way so that they feel partnered with us and not, we forgot to, they feel like we didn't hide the ball kind of thing, right? Yeah. They asked the ball kid for the ball. And the ball kid was like, no, no ball for you, that kind of thing. No, that it was all good faith. And if something happens that wasn't covered and we're discovering it in the process, you just try to solve it, right? And if it's a footage issue, and like, for example, I might need the sign off of the tournament to say, for this particular marketing exercise that is, maybe over our time limit, or is, can we get an approval? Let me see the creative. And often the tournament is very happy to approve something like that because, again, this will come as a shock from being a media lawyer. We want more people watching and being engaged. So things that drive that larger strategy and that larger culture at Tennis Channel means we're going to try very hard to get more people to watch. Right. That is kind of in our DNA.
Yeah. I mean, Tennis Channel has undergone a lot of changes, I would say, in recent years. Yeah. Launching a new channel, was acquired at one point or changed ownership. I mean, what is leading the legal team through all of that sort of change been like for you, and what have you been proud of as you've sort of helped shepherd the business through a bunch of different transitions and growth too?
So it's been exciting, and I will say when I first got there, the amount of leverage we had in the sport was decent, but it wasn't. I think it wasn't where I believe Tennis Channel could and should be. Yeah. Because I felt like we're the only place for this single sport. So let's try to aggregate all the rights we can. And it took us a number of years to do that through the men's tour and the women's tour, the ATP and the WTA respectively. And we did that with the help of our corporate parent, Sinclair Broadcast Group, which acquired us in 2016. So let me just take a quick step back on that. Was when Sinclair acquired us, we were able to then take advantage of their corporate leverage on the distribution side. The distribution of our main network then grew fairly rapidly with the help of their connections in the broadcast space and the way that cable television is distributed. So we had more money to work with, more leverage to work with, which meant we can then, it fed itself to now we could acquire more rights. Right. So these are all steps in the process. So now we are the exclusive rights holder to the ATP Tour and the WTA Tour. A number of U.S. events that are not covered under those master deals due to territory restrictions. And we've also added in Grand Slam deals with what we call studio shows to be partnered with ESPN, where they take the live and we take a studio show and build around it, which both helps their broadcast, they help our broadcast, and we give the viewing audience two different experiences. Yeah, which is really kind of nice, and it keeps the audience is going to find U.S. Open, Wimbledon, Australia on both places.
Sure.
And they're going to be very happy because they're going to find two different things. And they're different for reasons that range from both not cannibalizing each other, obviously, to the fact that the audience demands it. The audience wants the analysis. They want that high-level analysis from Lindsay, Jim, and Martina. They want to hear, they want to hear from Chris and John, play-by-play. They want to hear that on ESPN. They just do. We know, this will come as no surprise that there's a reason ESPN is in the live Grand Slam business, and there's a reason Tennis Channel is in the rest of the year business with the studio shows also at the Grand Slams, which leads me to the next piece of growth that came out of having all those rights is we only had one screen. How are you going to put all those rights on one screen? Well, the answer is you're not. I mean, your geometry teacher will tell you that math is not. You can make all the circles and ovals you want. It's just not going to work. So we developed Tennis Channel Plus, which is a subscription video on demand service, which is in the midst of its own transition right now to a more refined tennis destination product. We have something called T2, which is a fast channel, which I never heard of until we got into the fast channel business, right?
Yeah.
And that sounds kind of fancy, right? It means free advertiser-supported television, fast. Where you're going to see that is on some of the hardware platforms like Samsung, and I think we're in Vizio, and I think LG maybe. And now on Amazon channels, perhaps, and Fubo, and I want to make sure I don't underreport where we are, and then accidentally promise something we didn't close. So fair, just
disclaimer.
I have to put that disclaimer out there, and that's a credit to my colleagues on the distribution side because they are in a never-ending growth of platform and growth of distribution for the platforms. And part of that business now is you don't have the same content everywhere. So Tennis Channel linear feed has something, Tennis Channel Plus has something else live, Fast has something live, and I'm going to make this even more exciting. We have a pickleball joint venture with the Professional Pickleball Association and Major League Pickleball, which is a partner there. And we're trying to, we have a pickleball television fast channel that is also a destination for not tennis, pickleball. Shocking, right? Because it's pickleball. And that's been really fun to see that growth around a sport that's tennis adjacent, I would call it, to start. But it's really its own. It's a real standalone kind of adventure, I will say, because it's I play it. It's fun. I'm better at it than I thought I would be. But I mean, tennis has my heart, but it's, but pickleball is doing a real good job of trying to get, inch in there. So.
I'm a fan of pickleball. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on pickleball versus tennis.
We can.
But, I'm a big fan of pickleball. I want to ask you one last question before I've got a few fun ones to close us out. You're a tennis player yourself. What has playing tennis taught you, lessons that you've brought back to your life, to your work life that you use in your day-to-day?
That's a great question, and I love that question. The shorthand, problem solving. It is a problem solving sport. It is you and the ball. I used to think it was you and the player. Okay, so that was my first learning exercise. And when the people I take lessons from kind of reminded me, I don't care if I'm hitting the ball or somebody that's not as good as you is hitting the ball or somebody better than you is hitting the ball. It's the ball. And then I listened to Martina say something once on the air, and something about playing at a certain age. And she said something which is so true, and it just translates. The ball does not care how old you are. And I thought to myself, that is so absolutely true. And your job as a tennis player is to problem solve how to hit the ball back inside the lines. It's if you boil it down to its raw essence, that is your job as a tennis player, is to take the ball, put it on the other side of the net within the boundaries. Okay. Sounds pretty simple. We know it's not.
It's not.
but the joy of that is figuring out, and the problem solving goes like this. Well, I'm missing my serve. Why? Is it the grip wrong? Am I in the wrong foot position? Is it windy? Is it sunny? Is it an element issue? Does my arm hurt? Am I nervous? Am I choking? I can give you 50 reasons why I'm not serving, but I only need one to actually serve. So I have to figure out where my issue is and then go, okay, problem solve. Serve's going long. Okay, more spin, more safety. Boom. There you go. There's problem number one. Problem number two. This guy is running me around the court. I can't breathe. I can't keep up with the ball. How do I blunt him back? Well, you have to start figuring that out. Do you start taking control of the point? How do you do that? Do you hit harder? Do you hit softer? Do you make better angles? And you have to just learn to figure that out in real time. And that's the beauty of tennis, is it requires of you to take all your experiences and put them into play in real time, and simultaneously develop new ones for that moment, for that ball.
I love that. I hadn't heard or thought about it quite like that before. I mean, certainly keep it in between the lines, right? That's who wins.
Right.
But you and the ball, when I play tennis later this week, I'm going to be thinking about that.
Please, yes.
A few fun questions for you, Peter. The first is your favorite part of your day-to-day.
Wow. Is it tennis related or just
whatever you want? Yeah.
The favorite part of my day is walking the dog.
I like that.
Literally, no, it is. It's because it's a time. It's the first thing I walk the dog first thing in the morning, and it's the time of the morning where I kind of start to. I might listen to a podcast. I might listen to some news and get her moving and get me moving, get my brain moving, and I just enjoy that. It doesn't matter what the weather is either.
Do you have a professional pet peeve?
I think I do. And this is an in the weeds drafting one. Let's say you have a paragraph with a substantive deal point in it, and the phrase "to the extent applicable" appears in let's say at the beginning of the paragraph, and to the extent applicable, deal point, commercial point, condition, solution. People that draft take the "to the extent applicable" and move it from the front of the sentence to the back. So then it goes deal point, condition, comma, to the extent applicable. Now, here's my pet peeve. I really don't care. It does not change the meaning of the sentence.
Right.
Somebody on the other side of a transaction thought it was a good use of time to move that phrase, that part, that modifier from one part of the sentence or paragraph to the other, without changing the substance of the meaning. And my question is, why?
Why redline like
that?
Why
do that? I mean, if you want to, so that's and it's a classic pet peeve of mine.
That's good. I like that. Yeah. I have not heard that one before. That's really good. Yeah. Do you have a book recommendation that you would offer for our audience? It could be something you've read recently, book that has been important to you in your life.
Actually, this is I'm in the middle of it. I'm in the middle of reading it now, and I think it's relevant certainly in this day and age. It's Attack from Within. It's Barb McQuaid's book on disinformation.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really it's interesting and a little scary, but it's solution driven, and I haven't gotten to the solutions yet. So I'm at the learning part of the qualities of disinformation and how disinformation permeates our everyday life.
We will put that one in the show notes. That sounds very relevant. Last question, my traditional sort of closing question for my guests.
Okay.
If you could think back on your days as a young lawyer, maybe just graduating from law school, getting started, something that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then.
I probably would say be a little quieter. I was always, I am outgoing and kind of proactive and pretty inquisitive and curious, and I ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I think if I had known that at some of my questions at the earlier part of my career would have netted me more positive results than they did, I might have chosen my questions accordingly.
Yeah.
Or chosen not to even say anything.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of The Abstract recorded here in LA, Peter. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Tyler. It was a lot of fun for me as well. Thank you for having me.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.